Once upon a time, Vladimir Putin boasted about the inviolability of Moscow and St. Petersburg. However, Ukraine destroyed this inviolability overnight. On the night of September 12th, more than 200 long-range drones launched a full-scale attack across Russia, from Moscow to Smolensk, from Tula to St. Petersburg, and from Bryansk to Kursk. The attack had two main targets: Moscow and its surroundings, and the St. Petersburg region. Long-range swarms systematically destroyed refinery sites, port loading arms, pumping stations, and base peripheries. Overnight, Russia's two largest refineries were blown up, oil tankers sank, and port operations were paralyzed. The gasoline crisis in Russia deepened once again. But this time, the situation was more dire. The intensity of the attacks was so great that ordinary people could no longer go out on the streets, not only out of fear, but also because it was physically impossible. Gas stations were closed, and cities were echoing with the muffled sound of air defense sirens. Many areas were experiencing power outages, phone signals were disrupted, and city lights were going out one by one. People couldn't find gasoline for their vehicles, and even if they could, they didn't have the courage to go out. Because the sky was filled with Ukrainian drones, people shut themselves in their homes and tried to follow the news. Their eyes were glued to the television, their ears tuned to the explosions in the air, and their hearts were filled with suffocating anger and helplessness. The fact that even the capital could not be protected was the heaviest reality weighing on the hearts of the people. The first wave of drones targeting the Moscow region targeted the Smolensk refinery, 180 kilometers from the capital. Residents of the area reported more than 5 large explosions. The sky lit up with flames, and the sound of the explosions could be heard from miles away. In Tula, just 174 kilometers from Moscow, Ukraine's underground resistance network, the Fire Partisan Group, sprang into action. The group's target was one of Russia's most important air defense facilities. In the attack, which took place after midnight, the facility's main communications tower was engulfed in flames. The explosion knocked out the entire complex's communications infrastructure. Drones continued to patrol the skies over Tula throughout the night. The area was effectively under siege. However, the greatest destruction occurred in St. Petersburg and its surroundings. Ukrainian airstrike units launched a multi-pronged air operation, taking advantage of the radar blind spot over Leningrad Oblast. Thanks to electronic countermeasure systems used to confuse the radars, the Russian defense network was quickly crippled. Taking advantage of this gap, the wave of attacks reached the strategic Primorsk oil terminal on the Baltic Sea coast. Of the 28 Ukrainian UAVs that reached Primorsk, 7 landed directly inside the terminal. At the time of the attack, 2 Aframax-type tankers, Kusto and Kai-Yun, belonging to Russia's secret tanker fleet known as the Shadow Fleet, which it uses to evade sanctions, were busy loading at the terminal. The UAVs targeted the loading lines directly, causing 2 tankers registered in the Seychelles to catch fire. The fire quickly spread, engulfing the ships as they were chained to the shore. The explosions shook the port. Witnesses reported that black smoke clouds rising above the sea spread for miles. The Ukrainian attack did not stop there. The UAVs targeted 3 separate pumping stations supplying the Ust Luga oil terminal south of Primorsk. These were, respectively, the number 3 Primorsk line, the Andreapol transfer line, and the number 7 Western supply pump. Each was critical to Russia's crude oil export chain, but they were unable to withstand the drones. However, the Russian Defense Ministry presented a different picture. According to a statement from the ministry, 221 Ukrainian UAVs were shot down across the country overnight. This number was one of the highest nighttime operation shoot-down figures announced to date. Governor Alexander Drozdenko claimed that 28 UAVs were destroyed in Leningrad Oblast alone. Others were reportedly shot down in the Bryansk, Smolensk, Kaluga, Novgorod, Moscow, Belgorod, Rostov, Tver, Pskov, Tula, and Kursk regions. However, these claims did not hide what had happened. Pulkovo International Airport in St. Petersburg experienced severe disruptions in air traffic following the attacks. According to airport operators, 28 flights were delayed. These flights included international routes to Europe, as well as domestic connections. 13 flights were completely cancelled, and 11 planes were diverted to alternative airports. The alternative airports included Domodedovo in Moscow and Krabrovo in the Kaliningrad Oblast. Far from reassuring the public, all this completely exhausted the patience of a society already filled with anger. People were no longer just listening, they were no longer silent. Anger erupted on social media. Telegram groups, VK posts, comment sections of local news channels. Each became a virtual outcry. Some shared videos of explosions near their homes. Others shared balcony views showing smoke. While the shock of the social collapse had not yet been fully absorbed, the economic impact of the attack on the night of September 12th reverberated across the country. This was because the target was not just an infrastructure facility, but one of the arteries of Russia's war economy. The port of Primorsk is a facility whose strategic importance is evident even from its geographical location. Located just 100 kilometers from St. Petersburg, this massive terminal serves as an energy gateway to Europe along the Baltic Sea coast. Approximately 60 million tons of crude oil are shipped from this port to world markets annually. This translates to $15 billion in direct revenue for the Kremlin's war budget each year. A significant portion of this shipment is carried out by the so-called shadow fleet, a dark tanker fleet used to evade sanctions. Most of the ships used in this fleet have questionable registration systems and manage to evade international scrutiny due to their unclear flag state. However, the September 12th attack exposed the invisibility hidden behind this shadow system and proved its vulnerability. Meanwhile, the targeting of 3 critical pumping stations transporting crude oil to Ust Luga clearly demonstrated that the incident was not merely an attack on a port. Pumping stations number 3 Andreapol and number 7 were systems that played a central role in transporting Ural's crude oil to the Baltic coast. Integrated not only with internal connections, but also with oil pipelines coming from Belarus. According to energy experts, if even one of these 3 stations is temporarily disabled, the daily transport capacity in the region drops by 15 to 20%. However, in the September 12th attack, all 3 were targeted. This is not just a logistical disruption, it means the breaking of a strategic transport chain. The cost of the first day's disruption alone is estimated at over $40 million. However, this figure is only valid for a single day. If repair work takes weeks, the total economic damage could reach several billion dollars. Beyond the economic impact, this attack also created a rupture on the geopolitical level. This is because the port of Primorsk is not only economically important, but also holds a special place due to its military and strategic location. The port is only a few hours sailing distance from NATO territorial waters. For this reason, it has long been a stronghold for the Kremlin, both as a deterrent to the West and as a means of protecting its own security lines. Ukraine's direct targeting of this line carries 3 clear messages. The first message to Moscow: no place is safe. If Ukrainian UAVs can reach Primorsk, they can also penetrate other economic, military, and logistical centers in the heart of Russia with the same capability. This is not just an attack, it is a direct challenge to the Kremlin's security narrative. The second message is to Europe. This war is on your borders. Finland, Estonia, and Latvia are located just a few kilometers beyond Primorsk. This attack, occurring so close to the Baltic coast, serves as a stark reminder that NATO members are effectively on the front lines. Poland being forced to shoot down Russian UAVs in its airspace for the first time since 2022 is also part of this pattern. The war is no longer confined to Ukrainian territory. It has seeped into the fabric of European security. The final message is to global energy markets. Russian oil is no longer a safe commodity to trade. The closure or disruption of a terminal like Primorsk affects not only the Russian economy, but also global supply chains, from insurance premiums to freight agreements. With this attack, Ukraine aims to destabilize Russia's war funding strategy, which relies on oil exports. And this destabilization effort is not merely symbolic, it is mathematically devastating. The timing of these developments is also noteworthy. Just a few days before the Primorsk attack, Russia launched drone attacks on Polish airspace. This was strategic pressure directly targeting Europe. Now, Ukraine has reversed that pressure. The Primorsk attack is not merely retaliation, it is part of a broader equation. Ukraine is both punishing Russia internally and sending a message to Europe that the geographical scope of the war is expanding. And this expansion is not limited to airspace. What was once considered Russia's strongest area is no longer a weapon. It is gradually becoming an area of weakness. The tanker network, known as the Shadow Fleet, is already under pressure from Western sanctions. Problems with obtaining insurance, difficulties in finding ships, and increasing maritime escort costs were already pushing this system to its limits. Now, Ukraine's terminal attacks have been added to these challenges. In other words, the Kremlin is now facing major security gaps not only in selling oil, but also in getting it to port and out of port. While Vladimir Putin is grappling with these security gaps, he is also taking a major blow from Japan. Tokyo, a key member of the G7 bloc, has lowered the price cap on Russian crude oil from $60 per barrel to $47.60. And it didn't stop there. It opened a new front to undermine the Kremlin's energy revenues by imposing sanctions on 47 Russian companies, 9 high-level figures, and several shady intermediary organizations. At first glance, this may seem like a routine sanctions announcement. But when you look beneath the surface, you realize a much tougher and more sophisticated strategy is at work. Because this is not just an economic issue, it is about severing the arteries leading to the heart of Putin's war machine, one by one. Energy is the cornerstone not only of Russia's economy, but also of its military fabric. Tanks moving, ships setting sail, warplanes taking off, ballistic missiles being launched. All of this is made possible by oil revenues. Japan did not loosen a link in this chain. It struck a direct blow to the main body. Think of it this way. Putin's war budget is like a huge water tank. Every barrel of oil sold contributes $60 to this tank. When Japan turned off the tap at $47.60, the system suddenly started working in reverse. Leaks from the bottom of the tank increased, filling slowed down, and financial reserves dwindled. Eventually, the pump stopped, and so did the war. Tokyo initiated precisely this. For years, Russia had relied on loopholes to bypass the pressure created by Western sanctions. Dubai-based shell companies, ship-to-ship transfers in the Mediterranean, grey trade with countries like India and China. All of this allowed the Kremlin to continue selling its oil above the $60 limit set by the G7. However, Japan's decision acted like cement filling these loopholes. It directly targeted oil revenues by lowering the price cap, and, by coordinating this move with Europe, Canada, the United Kingdom and New Zealand, it expanded the scope of international pressure. This was not merely a symbolic stop. It was a real encirclement maneuver that increased the calibration on the economic front. Tokyo was well aware of the implications of this decision. Japanese officials know that 1/3 of Russia's state budget is directly covered by energy exports. Therefore, the target was not just money, but the regime itself, which is kept afloat by this money. And the Kremlin was once again presented with that classic dilemma that has often stood in the way of dictators throughout history. Either finance the war or pay your people's salaries. History shows that authoritarian leaders usually choose the first option. But history also shows that this choice inevitably undermines the regime from within. Ukraine clearly understands this strategic picture. Andriy Yermak, Chief of Staff to President Volodymyr Zelensky, stated the truth without any diplomatic filter. Russia should not profit from the sale of its energy resources and convert that money into war. A simple and sharp analysis, because every barrel sold, every ruble earned, means another missile attack in Donbass, another Shahed UAV over Kharkiv, another loss of life in Zaporizhia. Japan's price reduction has become one of the most concrete steps toward breaking this chain. Therefore, the Kiev government is not only welcoming this step with satisfaction, it is also actively campaigning to push Washington and Brussels to take even more aggressive measures. Japan's move was a strategic move that came at just the right time, ahead of the upcoming 19th European Union sanctions package. But more importantly, this decision is changing the global narrative. For decades, Russia has used oil as a tool of pressure. It sent the world the message, "You can't do without me." Europe believed this illusion. However, Ukraine's resistance and the West's restructured energy policies have exposed this myth as a bluff. Japan is now putting the cards that expose this bluff on the table. Lowering the oil price cap is not just a financial constraint. It is a clear signal to Asian markets. The message to India and China in particular is very clear. Putin's oil is now not only discounted, but also dirty. Politically toxic, economically risky, morally unsustainable. And here's the irony. While Russia is playing its last cards to offer the world markets cheap crude oil, The Germany-based defense giant Rheinmetall is setting up new production lines on Ukrainian soil. These factories are planned to produce not only ammunition, but also modern ground systems, armored vehicles, and artillery solutions for the Ukrainian army. At the same time, Europe's unmanned aerial vehicle production is overtaking US supply volumes for the first time, fundamentally changing the defense economy balance on the continent. In other words, as Putin's hopes for cheap barrels spread across the seas, Ukraine's ammunition lines are being reborn in the heart of Europe. While Russia is bleeding financially, Ukraine is not only resisting but also strengthening itself by deepening its logistics and production capacity. However, there is a missing piece in this global scenario: the United States. President Donald Trump is hinting at the possibility of new sanctions. During his election campaign, he is pressuring his allies and threatening India with tariffs. But these are not the tools that will end the war. Wars are not stopped by words, but by money. And Washington will now either tighten the financial noose by acting in concert with Tokyo and Brussels, or remain outside the economic encirclement of Asia and Europe and watch its global influence melt away. Meanwhile, Tokyo has turned its rhetoric into action. The Japanese government has pledged a $3.3 billion credit package to Ukraine to be financed by frozen Russian assets. This is not just financial support, it is also a strategic warning to the Kremlin. Because this decision is proof that the free world has now learned how to turn its own economic power into a weapon against Putin. Consider the following analogy. Oil was once the lifeblood of Russia's war economy. Each barrel was a new bullet for the Kremlin's arsenal. Each tanker, a rocket to be launched in Donetsk. But today, things have changed. Every time the price per barrel drops, Russia's financial pool dries up a little more. Europe and Asia have united around a common goal: to systematically and cumulatively impose costs on Putin until this war becomes unsustainable. For 4 years, Putin believed time was on his side. He thought the developed West would tire, public opinion would divide, and economic interests would take precedence over human rights. But today, the picture is different. Every discounted oil shipment, every shadow fleet tanker, and every depleted foreign exchange reserve is another blow in his war against time. Time is no longer Putin's ally. It is his greatest enemy. Because his war machine is being weakened by decisions patiently made in economic chambers beyond the real front lines. Russia's weapons may still be roaring on Ukrainian soil, but the real war is being won in Tokyo's strategic documents, Brussels' sanctions commissions, and Berlin's military production plans. And this week, Japan revealed a reality. Putin may have planned everything on the battlefield, but the economy is the one weapon he cannot defeat, and the trigger for that weapon has already been pulled. If you want to see more content like this, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every comment, every like, supports us in producing this kind of content. See you in the next video. Bye for now.